Hello guys, and welcome to another video. And this one we're going to be comparing the 4th Vow, a brand new unique body armor in the Crucible League, with the Doppelgänger Guise, an exclusive Maven drop unique body armor. And this is actually kind of a difficult comparison to make because these two body armors are quite specific. I think that any type of build would prefer to use one over the other depending on which side of the tree they're on, what sort of skills they're using and those sort of things. But I'm going to try and make this comparison as fair as possible because people have drawn a lot of comparisons between these two body armors, and a lot of people have been asking me for this comparison between these two body armors. And so if you're not sure exactly how these body armors work, we have the 4th Vow. As I said, this is new this league in 3.21. It has a special modifier that applies your full armor value to chaos damage taken from hits. So whenever you take a hit of chaos damage, that damage will first be mitigated by your chaos resistance and then by your armor. And this is very strong in combination with the Keystone Divine Flesh, since half the damage you take from elemental damage hits will be taken as chaos, and then that will be mitigated by the armor mechanic. And the 4th Vow also has some chaos resistance. It has a strong regeneration mod, and the mod which makes physical damage bypass energy shield is irrelevant if we're using in Divine Flesh, since that keystone makes all damage bypass energy shield anyway. And then we have the Doppelgänger Guise. This body armor is a little bit older. It came into the game when the Maven was introduced, and this is exclusively dropped by the Maven boss. And this has a very strong less damage taken modifier for both chaos and physical damage. This rolls up to 40% less. And unlike the 4th Vow, this also affects the damage over time. And once again, it combos very well with Divine Flesh because you'll be able to benefit from that less damage taken modifier on half of all of the elemental damage that you take. And the Doppelgänger Guise also has a very strong regeneration mod that will regenerate 10% of your life whenever you get hit. And if you want to look at the Doppelgänger Guise in a bit more depth, you can check out this video where I go into detail about this unique body armor. And once again, like my previous comparison video, I want this one to be as fair of a representation as possible. So I scoured through a whole bunch of builds, looking at lots and lots of different types of builds to find one where this comparison would actually make sense. And I landed on the Forbidden Rite Pathfinder. So when I looked through this type of build, I actually found that quite a few people were playing this build and using both body armors, quite a comparable amount actually. So in the Softcore Trade Crucible League, looking at level 95 Pathfinder builds that are also using Forbidden Rite, I found that 27% are using the 4th Vow and 20% are using the Doppelgänger Guise. So very comparable numbers there. And both body armor choices are popular for this build, which makes sense as they're both able to heavily mitigate the self-damage from Forbidden Rite. And in the case of the Doppelgänger Guise, you also get the 10% regen every time you use Forbidden Rite, since the skill hits you for chaos damage every time you use it. And I look through many of the Pathfinder Forbidden Rite builds, and they're all using very similar passive skill trees, even regardless of what type of body armor they're using. This passive skill tree is very, very similar for all of them. I'm using this example tree here, and this is around a level 95 passive tree. We've got some cluster jewels and things like that. Not much of that really matters. And we're going to be using a max roll 40% less damage taken Doppelgänger Guise and a max roll 250% increased armor 4th Vow. These had fairly equal comparison of pricing right now in the current league. And each build has capped spell suppression and is also using the same helmet with crafted fizz taken as fire and a fizz taken as chaos, either of worlds implicit. And both builds are running the same flask setup. We have a Taste of Hate with a max roll 15% fizz taken as cold, a ruby flask, a topaz flask, and a granite flask with the increased armor suffix. And it should be noted that both builds would likely drop the granite flask for a progenesis in a late game setup, but these are the flasks we're going to use for this test. It's also very possible that the build that uses the Doppelgänger Guise would use a jade flask or something else entirely instead of the granite flask. Because as I mentioned in the video about the Doppelgänger Guise before, one of the best uses of Doppelgänger Guise is when you don't really stack any kind of armor and you have no other ways of mitigating physical damage. Because the body armor is very low investment and provides massive defense against that type of damage. And we're also running Grace and Determination. And both builds are of course using a Glorious Vanity in the name of Zebakwa for the Divine Flesh Keystone. And here's the stats for each build. I actually checked through some of the builds on PoE Ninja to have a look Are these stats pretty comparable to what people are actually using in the game and for each body armor? And actually, they're very comparable. A lot of the builds that we're using the 4th Vow are sitting at around 20,000 or 25,000 armor. As I mentioned in a previous video, the 4th Vow doesn't really need much armor to be extremely effective at mitigating damage due to that full Transcendence mod that applies to chaos damage. So even with 20,000 or 25,000, it's going to be very strong. And so I believe these stats are a decent representation for both items on this particular build. However, I will preface this comparison by saying, on a different build, choosing to use either of these body armors, you're likely to heavily lean into the strengths of the body armor you're using and invest to patch up the weaknesses. For example, a build using the 4th Vow would likely have much more armor, meanwhile a build using the Doppelgänger Guise may have more evasion, which isn't factored in here, or it could have additional physical damage reduction from various sources or other less damage taken modifiers. So it's important to understand that this is a good comparison for a build that can use either body armor to great effect, but it's rare that a build wouldn't just be better with one particular body armor, so do keep that in mind. And so let's get into it. We're going to compare some boss abilities, beginning with some normal pinnacle bosses. We're using part of building presets here. These use about a 70% damage range roll for each of the boss's abilities. And we're going to start with a Maven Fireball. This is about 16,600 fire damage. And the 4th Vow takes about 20% less damage from this hit. But it's worth noting that if the Fireball caused an Ignite, the Ignite itself would deal less damage to the Doppelgänger Guise setup due to the less damage taken modifier factored in with Divine Flesh. Okay, so what about a Shaper Slam? This ability deals pure physical damage, about 13,700 physical damage. And the Doppelgänger Guise takes considerably less damage here. This is one of the weaknesses of the 4th Vow. If you don't stack huge amounts of armor, it's going to struggle against physical damage compared to other options like the Lightning Coil or the Doppelgänger Guise. But the thing with the 4th Vow is, as I mentioned earlier, the modifier that applies armor to chaos damage is still extremely effective even with a moderate amount of armor. And what about a Cirrus Meteor? This is about 12,500 damage of each type: lightning, fire, chaos, and physical. This one is actually very comparable with the Doppelgänger taking a bit less damage overall. And now, what about some uber pinnacle boss abilities, starting off with a Shaper Ball. This is about 13,500 cold damage with 40% cold penetration. The 4th Vow setup takes about 10% less damage here, and both setups are great against a hit with large elemental penetration due to Divine Flesh, which removes penetration on half of the damage that is taken as chaos. And now we have the Uber Eater of Worlds Beam, which is just a massive hit of lightning damage, about 25,000 damage. And you can see just how much work the armor mod on the 4th Vow is doing against these elemental hits. Even against a huge hit like the Uber Eater of Worlds Beam, the 4th Vow setup still takes less damage. And let's take a look at a really devastating hit, the Uber Azeri Flame Blast. This has 10% fire penetration and deals about 120,000 fire damage, an insane amount of damage. And even against a massive hit, the armor application of the 4th Vow puts up a valiant effort here. The damage taken here is quite comparable between the two, but the Doppelgänger's flat less damage taken modifier mitigates a bit more damage, and it's taking slightly less damage overall. And it's very important to mention that one of the biggest strengths of the Doppelgänger Guise, which we're not comparing here today, is actually the effectiveness against chaos and physical damage over time. And when combined with Divine Flesh, this is also going to be beneficial for elemental damage over time as well. So that is one of the big strengths of that body armor that we're not actually taking account for here. And overall, I think both of these items are very strong. They will have their uses in different builds. For example, the 4th Vow on a class like Juggernaut or Champion, where you can patch up some of the weak points and stack very high amounts of armor, it becomes an insane piece of gear. Meanwhile, I think the Doppelgänger Guise is one of the strongest low investment items in the entire game. It's extremely good in high evasion builds that don't invest in many other forms of physical damage mitigation. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see exactly what happens with the 4th Vow in League 3.22, since it has been quite popular in Crucible League and it's relatively common despite how strong the full Transcendence effect on chaos damage is. I'm not convinced that they will nerf the item. I think it's more likely that the drop rate is lowered. But there you have it, a comparison between the 4th Vow and the Doppelgänger Guise on a Forbidden Rite Pathfinder. Hopefully this was helpful, and obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the chances of these body armors being interchangeable like in this example is quite rare. I think most builds are going to have a preference as to which one you would want to use, if any. And I hope you guys enjoy this video. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.